The title in the program was a little not reflective of what we want to actually accomplish. We want to talk about the more broad topic of how can you use multiple forms of technology to create more interactive learning experiences and spaces. So to be explicit, most of the conference has really been focusing on the ends, like what are the kinds of competencies that we want, and this is really more about the needs. And so I just like to frame up a little bit about what we're going to do. We'll all do introductions and then have asked these colleagues to come with a varying array of use of technology in the classroom, but we'll want you to share what you've been doing too. I'm from the University of Minnesota, so is Leah Lundquist here, and part of why we wanted to convene this conversation is that we run an initiative called the Hubert Project. And the Hubert Project is really focused on helping public affairs educators have more sophisticated conversations with each other about multimedia and online tools. We are involved in both creating and engaging people in the use of those materials. So we do a lot of things around videos and case studies and e-studies. So we'll talk about that as we go. But really in our vision, we are building a community of users who are able to draw on these free learning resources. And where people are using them and people are building them, but that there's a real intersection or interconnection between the materials that are created in the space for us to teach and the community of people who are trying to learn more innovative ways to do it. And all of the materials are completely open source and open access, so we will just invite you to do that. So part of what that's about is having a place where you can ask dumb questions and learn from each other about teaching and technology, because a lot is changing constantly, and we just think that public affairs education is going to be more effective if we start to pool our knowledge about how to actually do that. So why don't we just go around and introduce yourselves and where you are currently practicing, because education is how we practice together. So,
I'm Beth, Cate. I'm from Indiana University, the School of Public and Environmental Affairs.
And I'm Jasmine Johnson. I'm from GW.
I'm Mike Shires. I'm from the Pepperdine School of Public Policy.
I'm Ezekiel Dixon-Roman from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice.
Carolyn Wood from the Harvard Kennedy School.
Jason Fletcher, La Follette School of Public Affairs in Wisconsin.
Samantha from the University of Delaware.
Julia Lusa from the Price School of Public Policy at USC.
Melissa Dees-Michaud from Willamette University, which is in Florida.
And Leah Lundquist from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School.
And again, I'm Jodi, Sandfort, also from Humphrey School. One of the reasons why we wanted to have the conversation today is that I personally think that the technology and education in public affairs is totally misframed. Sam Myers, our colleague, was just talking about how do you frame problems. In our field, it has been framed of do you do online courses or traditional courses? And people get into vast, huge fights about that. And there have been, in part, they fight because what's the research base for converting things online? There have been a lot of meta-analysis by the Department of Education and other places, and they suggest that hybrid courses get better effects, particularly for undergraduates and professionals, so where you're mixing technology and face-to-face interaction. And they and many others who've done meta-analyses in the last 10 years say that this online, offline is completely the wrong question to be asking. The right question to be asking is, in an increasingly technology-enhanced world where you sit there and take notes like I've been doing all day with my iPad, we need to think about how do we leverage technology to create more interactive learning spaces for people in the problem. So that's really part of what we want to do here today. We've prepared a little bit different things that we're using. We'll love to learn from you, things that you're using, because again, it's about creating effective learning experiences. There have been two people who've come into the room since we've introduced ourselves, so will you just introduce yourself?
Hi, Michael Doonan. I'm from the Heller School at Brandeis University.
Great, thanks.
Good to be here. Thanks.
And Matt McCorkle from the Sandfort School at Duke.
Very good. So, all this stuff is self-evident almost. Huge change in environment, huge change in student expectations, real pressures in our marketplace to change the format of our courses. A lot of academic administrators wringing their hands at MOOCs because suddenly we're giving away information. And really, we believe that, okay, so that's the environment. I'm an organizational scientist. You change when the environment changes, and I think we in public affairs are well focused to do that. One of the things that, to me, feels like a huge opportunity is that there have been huge advances in the last 20 years in the science of teaching and learning. And that suggests to us that technology can actually be part of exactly what we've been talking about today, of creating more competent professionals who can problem solve and problem frame. The research talks about the importance of prior experience as actually shaping the way brains are constructed. And frankly, when you're educating people who have been out for 2 or 4 or 6 years in professional settings, they're even more convinced that what they know from their experience is much more valid than any theory we're about to teach them. And it's really, therefore, I think, implicit upon us to think about, okay, if it takes a while to change how their brain is functioning, how do we create real-life problem situations in the classroom that is kind of built with that sense? The other thing, and good evidence from neuroscientists about if you do that, if you create a really interactive learning space, people's brains, the structure of people's brains actually shift. But you can't just come in and think, well, because I'm brilliant, the neuroplasticity of their brains is going to shift. You have to create ways for people to engage. And so you had a session earlier about capstones, which has been one tool that we have used in public affairs. Case studies has been another tool we've used in public affairs. But this research would really suggest that we have to do things that bring the nuances of contextual information into the classrooms. And so technology can provide a lot of means for us to do that. The other thing that the science of teaching and learning talks about is how important social setting is to adult learning. That it isn't merely enough appropriate to have content that's very rich. You actually need to create a social way of interacting around that content, and that people learn a lot from the implicit things that they see around body language, about interaction, around just the social dynamics. It's how we're hardwired. And again, technology, and these two will show in a bit some videos that they've done, gives you a way to have a learning object and then facilitate a discussion about the learning object. And the science would suggest that that kind of experience will get you closer to the kinds of learning outcomes that we've been talking about the entire conference. So for me, I think that technology in the classroom allows me to imagine a new way to be a scholarly teacher. And one of the paradoxes for me has been that we in public policy will shake our fingers all the time as these practitioners who do not use research to inform their practice. My practice is teaching. Not a lot of my colleagues use research-based evidence to inform their practice of teaching. And in this kind of environment, with what we know from science of teaching and learning, we can't afford to do that anymore. So there are lots of very cool active learning models. As I said, engaging content. We're lucky in public policy because we have relevant content. Our students are here because, as Sam Meyer said, they want to change the world. And if we begin to use both new learning objects, multimedia materials, and more engaging styles, likely that we're going to get further. So, and then the part of the Good Work Project as well, we're trying to do some research about what's the impact of this kind of environment in the classroom on the kinds of professional competencies. So, the concept that I've learned from technology-enhanced learning as a discipline is that they talk about these things called portable learning objects. Why they're portable is because they can be used again and again and again. They're a learning object because they provide a context, a situation, a setting that you can facilitate social discussion around. And so today, all of us, or I will stop talking in a minute, are going to talk about two parts of portable learning objects. We're going to talk about uses of some, and we're going to talk about creating some of them. Because as scholars, one of the invitations that we have is that we can actually use our expertise to create materials that otherwise will never be accessed by students unless you have a platform to share them widely with other people. So that's really the agenda for our time. The other thing I would say is thinking about portable learning objects, for me, made me realize, oh, an article is a portable learning object. an online lecture is a portable learning object. And it really shifted how I thought about how do I design courses, or even design a course session. How do you create these materials and interactions around them to advance the learning objective? So, let's go first to these video briefs. And Jasmine has some that she pulled up, but maybe tell a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah. So I'm happy that you all are here. Jodi's comment about being a practitioner and then coming to get your master's degree struck a chord with me because that was my experience. So I worked in between each degree in the sector, and what I found when I got my master's degree was that theoretically it was really useful, but without many of those concepts being applied, I did not then use them after my master's degree. So I very much sort of recognize in our students that those are some serious issues. I also teach a management class to MPA students, which is perhaps the class that students are most resistant to take. Anything that's a little bit fuzzy, where they feel that they've had a good supervisor in their lives, they know what it would be like to be a good manager, and then you want to introduce research that might conflict with that, is a difficult class to teach in the abstract. And so for me, a lot of what I've done in this class is really interject some technology into the classroom so that they can apply some of these theories to the complexity of real life, what happens in a real organization. So we can share these slides later, but what I've done is giving you an example of a class where I start teaching about more complex issues. I talk about public participation and civic engagement, which happens to be my research area. And what I do in the class is I have a group of videos. I show the class these videos of different ways of engaging the public. So America Speaks is really well known. Austin Transportation deals with sort of e-participation. I pull up a video of a town hall. I pull up a video of citizen surveys. And so we watch these. And
Do you want us to watch any of them?
No, I'll talk through it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So we watch the videos, and the topic that day is a stakeholder analysis. And so we talk about that in the abstract, and students are like, oh, this is a really good idea, and I'll do this when I'm a manager. I'm like, okay, let's actually see how that plays out. So there's a great article by Bryson, one of your colleagues, who goes through all of these different techniques for a stakeholder analysis. And the students think, these are good, I will use these in real life. So I break them into small groups. They look at sort of one of these videos, and they do a stakeholder analysis, and they actually see, does this reflect who actually shows up or who actually participates? What are the similarities and differences across these groups, and why is that? Is that a resource issue? And these are things for them to be aware of when they're practitioners, that perhaps you do the stakeholder analysis, but you do it by yourself, which we know is not useful and not helpful. And it helps them see some of those things that as a practitioner, you might be able to Google stakeholder analysis and do one, but we talk about that in group setting where they're really sharing the implications of using a tool without having a little bit more context and nuance. So that's one class, right? So I think what Jodi said about teaching and learning effectiveness, I'm really trying to make this class be much less about teaching them all of the wonderful things about public participation that I know and love, and it's why it's my research area, but really taking away something that they remember as practitioners. This is nuance. And if I engage in something like this, even if I do a town hall, that I want this to be, to have a little bit more complexity on the back end of things. So I guess what I take away from that is that it's not just using the technology, but really getting them to apply it and look at what happens in real life.
Beth, you use the immigration video similarly or different?
A little bit differently, actually. So I teach graduate students and undergrads, and the undergraduate students, among other things, because of the importance you heard today about being able to speak and write clearly and concisely and effectively. Well, oral presentation skills are something we work a lot on, especially with undergraduates. And so one of the things that I have them do as part of a semester-long research project, a big part of that project is the written piece of taking an advisory or consultant position and advising a real stakeholder on how to synthesize legal and policy and operational and ethics considerations and give some advice. But then they also have to produce more of a kind of public service / advocacy piece.
So this is a student piece?
That is it. That is
show it.
Created by 2 freshmen and 2 sophomores. And then we evaluate it after they put it together. The students watch it and give critiques. Other students give critiques.
Oh, I have it right here. I didn't know that when I watched it. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Let's meet Samantha R. Samantha is from Canada, and she got a green card to study in the U.S. when she was 18 in 1995. This makes Samantha a legal resident of the United States. In 1997, Samantha was caught carrying marijuana and was convicted with possession of marijuana. Samantha served her sentence and was released. Last year, 2012, Samantha left the country to visit her family in Canada. When she returned to the United States, she was taken into custody and was told that she was to be deported because of her old marijuana charge. Samantha was still a legal resident before she was deported, but because of a 15-year-old conviction, Samantha had to rebuild an entire life back in Canada.
Is it fair to convict someone because they entered the U.S. illegally or because they had an old conviction, even though they served their time? Yes, both Max and Samantha committed crimes, but perhaps they didn't deserve to have their entire lives destroyed, especially since both had served their time. These two stories point out two major problems with the U.S. immigration system. One is the over-criminalization of immigrants. This means that too many people are being charged with insignificant crimes. The second problem is the lack of due process rights given to immigrants. These are the constitutional rights given to people during the legal process.
We can fix these problems. We need to convince the House of Representatives to pass Bill 744, the Immigration Reform Bill passed by the Senate in June 2013, that gives immigrants back some of their rights. We also need reform that gives immigrants rights and allows judges to decide deportation sentences while taking into account family connections and that places time limits on old crimes. Immigrants to the U.S. need this reform. U.S. citizens need this reform. We need your help. Contact your representative today and ask him or her to pass Bill 744.
So what we do with this then is the students sort of create drafts of these. We go through a round of comments and then they finalize them and we go through sort of another round of analysis. And there are all kinds of things that, you know, that they will probably still revise on that. But the idea is to get them to, like, they have a set time frame. maximum time frame, and they have to be able to translate, a fairly difficult policy challenge. In this case, the over-criminalization of illegal immigrant entry and re-entry and what that means, and including some cost issues that got put in later. But they know they've got to make that understandable to real mortal. And then they build a website and they put this and some other material up on the website and then publish it for more feedback. So.
Are questions allowed at this
Of course.
point? Okay. I'm just curious, how do they learn to develop this kind of media and the kind of editing and all that?
To be honest with you, a lot. So I started out asking who has the skills in this class to do this. And a lot of them already have it because a lot of them come in, these kids are coming in from high school, middle school, and they have already been doing this stuff. They've been doing their own videos, and some of them have quite sophisticated talents. Some do not, in which case we have a Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, which will sit down and they have both the equipment and they have consultants who will then help walk them through it. And I have not nearly the level of skill, but I also have other graduate and undergraduate students who, as I come into contact with them, I build my little list and bureau of would you be willing to sit down and help other students as I have my next class. If they have a question, can they call you? Can they do this? So they also have just some peer help along the way.
No, it's awesome. I think, especially when you talk about social impact, the possibilities of reaching many people by being able to place a video or film media like this online that many people can access. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So in a little bit, we'll talk more about content creation. When I ordered these slides, I actually didn't realize that was part of a student product because there's a lot of resources that we have to support people who want to do this kind of thing with their students.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of that at our school now. But what's also interesting about this student project on immigration is that if I'm going to teach a policy analysis course, I can bring this 3-minute video in as a learning object because it's portable. And then I can facilitate them saying, okay, actually, do you believe the conclusions that these students think? What alternative kinds of evidence could you bring to bear in trying to create
What haven't they taken into account? Other perspective, yeah, absolutely.
So Mike was going to share some of the ways that he uses technological tools to facilitate student engagement in some of the courses that he teaches.
So there's kind of two dimensions to this. I always like to point out, because even one of the comments this morning is, well, I use PowerPoint, and that's kind of the modern, that's at least my generation's version of technology. And I always like to point out to my students, we're still writing on the cave walls. The caves have gotten nicer, and the walls have gotten moved. But we're still drawing in charcoal on the cave walls in so many ways with this. And this idea of kind of engaging students, one of the things that I've tried to do in our program, and some of it's kind of old school, we have a camera, and you want to talk about teaching public speaking, require students to do a presentation and then watch it as a class, critique the delivery, and then go back and critique the structure of the argument. And students are terrified the first 2 times through, but once everybody's gone through it, you really get this culture where they're starting to interact not only with kind of the content, but also with the delivery. And it's like, oh yeah, I saw, Mr. T-Rex was up there, and you were playing with the clicker the whole time. And so that was kind of one of the things that we started early on in the program. It's kind of traditional. Video cameras make it possible. It turns out you can't do it online easily, because it takes forever to render video. I don't know if you've tried that, but it's getting faster, but it still takes a while. The second thing we did was I started messing around with clickers. These are what they call student response systems, SRS. These are little cards that you can put a quiz up on the screen, and the traditional use of this was if you were really sophisticated, you'd have a pretest about content, so you'd assign a reading, you'd have a pretest to assess where they were, you'd do your classroom activities, and then you'd have a post-test to see if they'd learned. And you'd put the results up, and you'd hopefully see some evidence of learning at the end of the class. But one of the things I quickly realized was this was a tool. If you think about it, a lot of the stuff we've seen is, okay, let's react to a storyline. You can make it more personal, more interactive. Even the idea of the case originally. By the way, I take the blame for the title of the session. But in some ways, it's true. Cases were designed to bring an outside reality into the classroom and have the students interact with it. And a lot of these technologies are about bringing more content, more interaction with the students to help them engage the questions. And so what we do, what I've started messing around with the clickers, and I will call it messing around because it's not a science yet, is trying to use the students' experiences in life as a case study for the class. And so what happens is you go out and you're talking about something like the Affordable Care Act. You have a series of questions, and you have an option whether it's multiple choice or whether they can type in the answers. Typing in the answers takes a lot longer because it's the old texting keyboards. But depends on what kind of depth. You want to make sure if they're typing in words, it really has value. But you start asking them questions about the assumptions that underlie it, what the goals were, how you see it unfolding, and you kind of you have a structured dialogue. You start off with what are the principles behind it. You poll the students. Now, two things happen when you poll the students. In the case of something like the Affordable Care Act, there's a lot of opinions and impressions. There's rarely content experts in the room. But there are other public policy issues like education policy. I always tell my students, if you want to be popular at a dinner party, tell them you do education policy, you'll never have to say another word. Because everybody in the room is an expert, right? Everybody's gone to school. And so, if you have a case or a topic issue like that, then they can interact with the content from their experiences. And you have school teachers in the room, sometimes you have administrators in the room, and you ask questions about, okay, which is the most important priority? And you'll end up with very different answers depending on which background they come from. And then you use that as a platform. It does two things. One is, and I think this is really important, especially if you have an international student population, it shows the students are not alone. Wow, I think this, and I'd be afraid to raise my hand and say this, but look, there's 20 people in the room who think the same thing. Okay, now I'm a little more willing to step forward and lay that idea out there.
It's that science of teaching and learning principle about the social dimension of learning.
Yeah.
It sticks more after you've done that point.
Absolutely. And not only that, but there's a community around it, right? It's not just me, and now I can engage in these ideas. And the best part is there's people with different ideas. And so you get to kind of unpackage those differences. Well, what's driving the differences in the perspectives? And then the second part about it is polling for insights. Say, okay, where should we go from here? Should we emphasize this? Is the solution down this path? And we were talking earlier about that kind of critical thinking, problem structuring kind of process. You actually get to walk through, okay, how do I structure this? And if I structure it on this path, and you kind of go down that road for a while, you explore whether it works or not, or whether it gets you where you want. Then you come back, and you follow a different path. But this is just kind of a tool to open the door, but also to kind of draw the students' experiences into the classroom conversation. It works sometimes. Interestingly enough, it works in larger cohorts. It works if there's multiples. If there's 5 people that share your idea, okay, I'm all right with that. But there's only 2 of us, and if the other person's not as real strong, I'm going to be all by myself. Right? I mean, you have that sort of dynamic. So it does work. My sense is 40 or 50 students and above. There's always issues with technology. These are radio transmitters, and there's a little thing that plugs into your laptop, and it works pretty well if everybody has one. One of the things I did last year as part of our university's accreditation process was actually go out and get the university to buy it. We have a small program. We have about 120 students. Buy a complete set. So when they come to my core class in the first semester, they get one. In theory, I'll get them back next year. Hopefully. There's an expectation I'll get them back next year. But the idea is they always have these, and you can always draw on them. It doesn't take long to actually get it up. It does take a little bit of time sometimes if it's not behaving, and those disruptions are sometimes very painful for classroom settings. I always try and set up early, but it still happens, no matter what you do. But I've just found it to be kind of a fun tool, especially for larger classes. I mean, most of our classes are under 20 students. But for the classes where I have all 60 students in a cohort, which I try and structure that class so I have that size, it really has become a powerful tool for allowing the group to kind of talk back to the screen, if you will. You put the slides up there, and then they get to talk back to it. So it's really been kind of a fun engagement tool. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's been a great way to sort of engage the students actively.
So there's kind of a continuum, I think, of materials that exist, materials that you're kind of co-creating with students, materials that students or you create. One of the ways that we've been trying to facilitate people sharing is through the Huber Project really having a searchable kind of infrastructure. So maybe you want to talk about that.
Sure. So I come to the Huber Project as both a a student who has used the materials, an author myself of e-cases, that came out of research I did as a master's of public policy student, and now in a supportive role, supporting faculty globally to create multimedia materials. And I really loved the session so far today because a lot of it continued the thinking we've been doing as part of this project about the communication skills that you want students to come out with, about visualizing data and synthesizing data in compelling ways for different audiences. And so I think it's vital how we model that as instructors in the materials and the curriculum we're creating. So you're not just using technology or integrating technology into your teaching, but you're really using it to create new curriculum too. As that's the potential that exists today. And I think partnerships with students to do this is vital and so accessible these days. What we're finding is what we use as a part of our project to support faculty in creating materials are all open source tools. And that's the beauty of it. There's a very low both learning curve these days and financial barrier. So, right now we've received a little funding from a human service funder to help create some video briefs similar to the one you created, but to be used as teaching tools. And so these are 3-minute videos. I don't think I have one in here.
You do. Anyway.
Okay, so there's one on policy fields. So taking this concept and then the content, how we've partnered as a faculty member works with a research assistant who helps take this concept and this theory, reads the scholarly articles on it and synthesizes it into a 3-minute video and thinks about how to visualize it. And so they're getting these other skills while they're helping create new curriculum for this faculty member, and we've just found that to be a really great partnership. We talk about e-cases and, sorry, these aren't in the right order, e-cases and video briefs, which the e-cases are a packaging of a number of different multimedia resources. So as a faculty member, again, you're working with a research assistant, and the research assistant can be working collaboratively with you to think about, again, how to visualize the learning objectives that you want to achieve through this case study. And so it forces them to think about the graphs and charts that might be created. It's not just going out there and grabbing media that might already exist always, even though that, of course, is more and more possible too as more research is visualized. But I think the whole point of this is that what we have done through the Humor Project and are willing to support faculty anywhere to do is to use accessible tools to create multimedia learning materials. Jumping in the walls. But it also doesn't have to, you're probably already doing it. That was the whole point of the content curation slide. So another thing we have is just a curated case, which is a collection of multimedia resources around a particular topic. So, I imagine many professors are already doing that in their classrooms. But this platform provides the opportunity to share those globally, and so that you can have sources to draw on as you teach around these topics.
You want to go now to that's great lecture capture?
Oh gosh. So one of the other things on the undergraduate side, I'm the lead instructor, which means I'm kind of the shepherder of people and resources to teach this class, which is our core bachelor's course in law and public affairs. And I do the same thing at the graduate level. I'm not the lead instructor, but I teach a graduate level course in law and public affairs. And for some sort of core topics or principles, one of the things that I have wanted to do, and particularly for our multi-section course, where at the undergraduate level, mostly it's taught by adjuncts, and they are mostly practitioners, and they're lawyers, they're judges, who are working full-time plus jobs, and for whom, while the adoption of new technologies and integrative methods of teaching and everything is all very attractive to them philosophically. They need it to be made quite easy to do, or else it's not going to get done. And so between that sort of pressure and impulse and just the desire to reinforce kind of after the moment of class discussion, some core principles in the class so students can go back and look at something engaging, but in a very short, very low tech, very easy way to do it.
Can I just show the first 30 seconds?
Yeah, just go ahead, yeah. You'll see an example of what I'm talking about.
And you said
legislatures on the grounds that the laws violate the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. Judicial review refers to striking down a statute or reviewing a statute on the grounds that it violates any provision of the Constitution. But what we're going to review today is claims that a law violates individual rights under the Constitution and how the courts engage in judicial review for those claims. So as we've discussed, the courts use standards of review to help them balance, on the one hand, the power and the right of legislatures under our constitutional scheme to pass laws that reflect the majoritarian will of the people they represent. And on the other hand, the individual rights to be protected against majoritarian will. And the standard of review that a court selects to review a given law is going to more or less determine whether that law is upheld or not. So let's take a look back at the standards of review.
okay, so good example of the Cate wall. But I think, as you were saying, part of what's interesting here to me is that it's portable. That this isn't something that just you are doing. It's a way for to assure some kind of quality control across your curriculum for some basic content.
Exactly right. And any of us, there are 8, in any given semester, there are 8 of us who teach this course. And there's a stable of probably 12 or 14 of us who do it at various times. And so what we can each do with this and a tripod, I mean this and that basically, is, and downloading a free application, is stand in front of a whiteboard. Those are literally 2 pieces of erasable whiteboard where we draw very basic stuff and 1 or 2 sort of slides worth, and then talk through a topic in 5 minutes or less and throw it up there. And we're fortunate because this type of curriculum, I think, there is a lot of commonality. There's even some commonality in the examples we use to illustrate the class, but those examples can vary widely. And yet we can pull up anyone's. I can take another instructor's, to Jodi's point, 4 to 5 minute video on judicial review, and it's going to be useful to me in my class and vice versa. And it also lets us, where we have very differing practice backgrounds that are relevant to different parts of a class. One of the big challenges, we've been talking, I think, throughout the day, right, about what do you do with limited resources and how do you do more with less, is I've never practiced criminal law. And yet there are some pretty interesting and important public policy challenges in criminal law and process that I would rather have someone with more expertise speak to than me. I can invite them to my classes, but they may not be able to come there on the day and time. But I can have them do something like this, or we can beam them in through Skype, which we've done. I mean, that kind of stuff just broadens the resources available to us to bring in a lot more voices than our own.
One of the values of this, too, is that if you have international students, sometimes being able to listen to it at a different speed, or if you're doing something really complicated, first, in economics or something like that, letting the student come back and review it, and making a couple different approaches to it. And so you have, you don't have to spend all the classroom bandwidth, but you get to have these as a resource for the students.
And I would offer that there's tools that make it really easy to capture an MP3 from this too, so people who are commuting can listen to it and then watch it, when they get home, or it just allows the students more flexibility too.
Just don't recommend they do that, or the lawyers will find
So really 2 main points of this last segment. One is there's obviously lots of content that's available, but part of what motivated us in the Hubert Project and talking with Indiana and other schools is that public affairs was being left out of the content creation business. And that, or we were only creating lecture captures, when there's all these other mediums, like you saw with the video briefs, there's e-cases, e-studies, where we actually should be bringing our expertise, because there are multiple policy issues that can be enlightened. So the one final thing I would say, and then I want to hear about content use or content creation that you've been engaged in that could be a resource to others, is one of the things that I would say, and I think you would agree, that when you engage in thinking this way, it fundamentally changes how you are organized as a school. We have had to have teams of professionals and students and faculty who are working together on content creation. And as an answer to your question, some of these 20-year-olds, they've been creating videos for 10 years at school. So to be able to then be able to come and create a video on immigration policy, or work with an expert on creating an analytical video on something like policy fields analysis, it's very compelling. So there are more resources in our schools to do this. But I'm not a technology early adapter. My husband thinks it's hysterical that I'm doing any of this. But it's really because there's so much knowledge now among our schools that I really think that the field is open.
Do you want to talk for just a second about creating multimedia student assignments too? We've talked about mostly faculty-driven content, but creating assignments that can live on as that, in e-portfolios for students, I think is valuable too.
Right, so it's a version of what Beth did in her video briefs. Some of our capstones, I teach a course on policy analysis, some of our courses on John Bryson's strategic planning course. He's actually having the students use these kinds of templates to make a choice. They can either do a final paper, or they can use these templates in development process, open source, free, not that hard, you've done all the documentation, and students are building these wonderful case studies, really, or kind of policy briefs using a multimedia content. And when we think about the kinds of competencies we want to build for professionals, I was thinking about it this morning. Employers say they want that, and so that's one of the pieces.
Can I say really quickly as well that there may be some initial hesitation around doing this because it seems like a lot of prep work, and I've actually found the opposite, right? So I find that I plan a lot before the semester begins, but this is my reality. I don't know if this is reflected in everyone else's, but the actual class prep the day before, the day of is less, because it really then is about the discussion around this particular content. So in case any of you were thinking, oh, I'm already this, how am I going to do this? I find that it actually reduces my class prep and increases the quality of the discussion, which in an OB class, an organizational behavior class, is awesome.
Can I jump on that? Because I also think that there is sometimes this resistance, and just drawing again on the population that mostly of the adjuncts that I was mentioning before, they're people, sort of my age or older, and so they are not as facile with the new technologies as our students are. But even within our course management system, what I found is if you actually both point out, as Leah was saying, that there are a lot of kind of easy, user-friendly tools, but that plus, I think actually sitting down with them and doing a tutorial and then giving some practice time right there. We found with one thing where people were trying to do just-in-time teaching, so you basically have these students are doing a bunch of reading and ingestion of material. Then you want to ask them a question like an hour before class so that the faculty member can look at some quick responses and figure out what do I need to focus my time on in the classroom, where are the difficulties in understanding. And our course management system had a way to do that, but it was terrifying to people who had never used it. So we said, well, let's just do a tutorial, and we'll actually sit and do this a couple times ourselves. So if they could do it hands-on in that group, like one time, then they would take it over. And then they thought, even people with larger classes where they were a little more concerned, they said, oh, no, this will work out. So it's kind of that combination of, demystifying and having easy-to-use stuff.
And again, just social part of learning combined with the idea. So what are some examples or resources or ideas that you have that you think we could all benefit from? More questions.
Well, I teach a history of social welfare benefit, history of the social welfare system in the United States class. And I've put up a lot of speeches. There's so much online from LBJ, and there's the Richard Nixon tapes. and there's notions of American liberalism. You look at Obama and some of his speeches that he's given, and they're very liberal in the old sense. And that, as an object, starts discussions that go in great directions.
The other thing that I've been doing too, I use this in these kinds of little clips, and I guess you could archive them and count it as much. But for example, in my policy implementation class, policy processes class, teaching about, for example, implementation of criminal justice realignment in California. It sounds very abstract, right? Okay, well, we're going to send low-level, non-violent, non-sex, serious offenders to the county level, blah, blah, blah. And I found this great frontline video. I use it. And they're interviewing, is it the one where they interview the guys in jail? Like, how many of you are drug addicts that are like raising their hands? And my students are kind of just bowled over because they don't even think about it. I mean, it can hit so hard, and it makes it very real in a way that just reading about, okay, counties are having a hard time with their capacity is very different than actually seeing on screen what it's like to be someone in a really, poor quality county jail. And I think it is this kind of valence that you don't get just through reading. And so just finding those kinds of materials, and you have to spend a lot of time looking for them, but 10 minutes of that is so much more real for students.
There's actually a lot of research to document exactly what you've said. So there's been a lot of deployment of experimental controlled designs of this in business schools in particular. And so again, when you're trying to shift students thinking about something that they know it from their experience, video becomes a very potent kind of tool because it provides a three-dimensional alternative experience that cognitively is processed differently than a written piece. So it's very interesting. We haven't done that kind of research in public affairs, but there's no reason in my mind that should matter.
Sure, I have a follow-up question. For those of you I use some video clips too, but I'm always torn about, do I assign that so they watch it before they come to class, or do I use it in class? Because I have 50-minute classes, and so even if I were to show a 10-minute video, that's a huge chunk of my class. So I get torn because I like the discussion that the video will generate, right? But if it's 10 minutes or longer, I tend to assign that for pre-class viewing, and then I don't always get all the students to do it, right? So,
but that's also true of articles.
It absolutely is true of articles. But I'm shifting more to using NPR clips and video clips and whatever else instead of reading in my class, because my undergraduates don't read.
I know if you pair it with a short assessment too, 4 questions, that can be a valuable way to get people.
I assign it before, and then I just have them break into groups, and I have them sort of report out, like what was the gist of whatever you just watched, and then we talk about that for a little. I have short classes as well.
I think there's it depends on what your purpose is. If it's just kind of to inform the debate, it's easy to put it early. Sometimes you want that emotional impact.
Right.
You're going to talk about education policy. Okay, take a clip from Waiting for Superman for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Really sets a tone for the conversation that you want right then and there, and you want everybody to have it. And you're right. I mean, even when you tell them, I can tell whether you've read it, because if you put it on Sakai, you can see whether they accessed it or not. They don't do it.
I have a direct example related to this one. I teach a course in education, society, and social policy that deals with the dualisms between schooling and society, from philosophy research to policy. And I actually use a clip from Jeffrey Canada's TED Talk as a way to open up a critical engagement around this very questioning, and even critically interrogating Jeffrey Canada's very assumptions into the Harlem Children's Zone, and how he even slips into the centering of schooling as well. So and that's a clip that's 10 minutes long. I have longer classes in here, but it provides that kind of affect that really, and really cultural text as well for the students to really bite into and grapple onto.
This interaction makes me want to say a point that part of thinking this way about portable learning objects is, as you say, getting real clear about your teaching purpose, but also to realize that different forms of media accomplish different purposes. So we've only used articles or data sets. This is a different kind of information. I think about what I've learned using longer video clips like you're talking about for social welfare and these e-cases. So these e-cases actually take a video of you as a protagonist, and you're another stakeholder, and you're somebody else, and it connects you to the budget documents that you're fighting about. We've stepped away from doing too much documentary-like video, because a documentary video, we all know how to consume that. We become very passive, because there's a storyline that we can figure out. We all know how to do that. But that oftentimes in teaching implementation, we want to hone the ability of people to synthesize the perspective of this stakeholder, and that stakeholder, and their budget documents. And so the way the media is actually assembled achieves different kinds of learning purposes. And that consciousness has just been really clear to me as I think more about, okay, what are the combination of learning objects and facilitation around them to achieve my learning objective for that day. And that, again, the science of teaching and learning is like, we can get clearer about our objective each session, then we'll be more effective.
I think there's another continuum in the midst of all this, which is and I love Sam's comments about this on the panel, it's that continuum between reality and policy and practice and the theory of the classroom. And the more multimedia video and things like that have allowed us to kind of safely bring victims into the classroom and to have a conversation about their situation. It's even more powerful if you can take the kids into an inner city school, which I've tried it with LASU USD a couple of times. It's hard. But it's this idea of the reality, and I always like to talk about the great things and the competing great things and policy choices. What are we trying to accomplish? What are our purposes? And these kind of tools really let the students engage with it, and in the case of the student-driven stuff, make it their own.
More active learning.
All right. Two questions. I mean, I found your comment just now interesting. I have never worked directly in this, and just indirectly through our schools. And I'm interested in how you find cases that have video dimensions and documentary dimensions and so forth versus the pure on paper case. And I'm reminded, I do not let my kids see the movie before they read the book. So they were not allowed to see The Lord of the Rings in the theater before they had to read the book for seeing what Harry Potter and so forth. And that the teaching possibilities of the imagination of, you want a case to be immersive. You want the kids to walk in and be thinking like, I am this person, or, I'm in this situation. And does the imposition of a video of an actual person who is, on the video, and the narrative where you were imposing a linearity, if you will, on the scene, does that diminish the imaginative, the ability to completely immerse yourself in the situation because you could be that person because there's no concrete so like on a very existential basis, like it seems like video and the multimedia studies and cases add tremendous potential at a sort of cost, and I'm wondering what you're finding actually in the trenches when you do that, the impact.
So we have a research proposal that's out that would allow us to explore that empirically. My sense of it is there are a couple of different purposes. So for e-studies, it's actually about, as Leah was saying, curating what are publicly available materials about Los Angeles, and let's just put them all in a place, and so the students can look at the media accounts and then really get to what Sam was talking about earlier. What's the problem? So that's not its intention of an e-study, is to not put yourself in the perspective of a protagonist. But if you want to put yourself in the perspective of a protagonist, it's often about giving, again, the way we construct them based on the lessons of the science is that it's like life. It's my conversation with her is on video, and my conversation with her is on video, and then we're looking at the financial reality. And it doesn't have to be in a linear structure. So there's this great template, we don't have one here, that's a dial. And students have to choose what kind of evidence do I want to can interact with next. And again, like every other learning object, it depends a lot on, do you put a memo with that? Do you have them do a budget analysis with the budget documents that's in the material? But it's all presumed that people learn more. They learn more when it's contextually grounded. So that is the difference. And I think that I agree. Don't let your kids watch those movies.
There's something that you said about you gain all these additional skills instead of just reading that the person submitted a memo to the director. You're opening up that memo and getting to see the memo and how it was constructed, or you're getting to see the financials and have to decipher for yourself how in the red they were, or these, maybe seeing a comparison of the strategic plan this year versus the strategic plan 10 years later.
There is a cost, and that's time.
Yeah.
These things, even for the students, take more time. I mean, it takes a lot of time to watch somebody's 10-minute statement. It takes 10 minutes, whereas you can probably read the transcript in 5.
And it takes time to create them, which is why in this initiative we're trying to, if you create them, share them. You get to say how you're attributed, it's open access, Creative Commons, share them. I want her
to get the message out to people because this is awesome.
We're starting, and it's growing. I mean, we now have 50 objects in the collection across 4 continents, and we didn't have any like environmental policy because nobody had contributed to that yet. But now your colleague's just done something on wolves, So it really will be a collection that we are all co-owners of. That's the intent. And if institutions want to contribute, there's an MOU and an operational partner, and we're just trying to make this a public good.
And trying to use it as something that can help internationalize the curriculum across our programs too. We have a partnership with Hong Kong University, so it's fun to see the cases that come out of their context. We've been working with universities across Africa that are starting new MRPP programs, and we're hoping that they'll Creative Commons license their cases and make them a part of this repository too, so that in a global society students can learn and generalize concepts across different contexts.
So I really like the idea of having some quality control, and that's a value of having an archive of things that have been used and been, vetted. I've been doing a series of lectures on diversity debates. So one of them was how to go to Fisher versus University of Minnesota. Another one was the Chicano Studies. And we used the videos that we found on YouTube. But students who were preparing the discussions noted that there was a big difference between some of the, quote, facts that were described in YouTube and what they found out of, quote, independent reports. In particular, the big example has to do with the claims that were raised on the Chicano Studies debate in Arizona. The biggest problem was that what you found on YouTube stops at the point where the bill was passed. And so the follow-up, it turned out that the bill was found unconstitutional. It turned out that there was an appeal. It turns out that, so there's this kind of bias in what you say. Then there's another video that comes out of an advocacy organization that has Abigail Fisher herself answering questions about, why was I rejected? How many people got rejected? It's a fabulous video. It's actually passionate and so forth. But the numbers are different. I'm not saying they're wrong, but the numbers are different from what I found in the briefs. So therein lies a value of having some sort of vetting of these things, and kind of saying this kind of passes a threshold of having met some validity test.
And so I would say, I just leaned to her and said, we're going to follow up with you, because what then a good thing to do is to use this template, put one video, put another video, put a PDF of a 2-page briefing document, and then not only students in your classroom can benefit from that analysis you've done, but Mike can use it, or Jasmine could use it. Because exactly, as scholars, we need to curate those important, potentially misleading things that are in cyberspace, because our students cannot. That is not their area of expertise unless we frame it for them. And that's part of, I think, what it means to be professionally trained public affairs person.
I do think there's a footnote to that too, which is that's a skill our students need to learn to acquire, because when they go into the workforce, there is no moderating influence. And I think it's actually one of the areas, this didn't come up in today's conversation, and I was kind of surprised by that. This information literacy question is going to be huge as we get an almost unmeasurable amount of information available.
Yeah, my experience is positive, but it's a little different. I'm a former political consultant, so I started off using ads to teach politics, and with the undergraduates, I had no problem. They loved that, and in fact, when I would do the Affordable Care Act, if anybody's seen like Kaiser with the little cartoon, some things that are brilliant for 5 to 7 minutes, that master students should appreciate the simplicity of what's being communicated there. But I found within the core master's course, and I hope this will change, a lot of resistance to the video stuff. Now, and so what we moved to from the students, because I think they were offended on some were offended. No, not that we're here to be bored, but we don't need to see a cartoon. That's not how we are educated, or we don't need to see a TV ad to get this communicated. So we moved though to an elective. We've been bringing practitioners in, and one got teams of students to do videos, to do their own videos, which was a different, and 15 or 20 of our students really took to it. But I would have to tell you, there are 15 to 20 master students who were really resistant, thought this was not professional, and I think that will change. But I was just stunned, because the undergraduates seemed to absorb it and move through it. Of course, there's written material too, but the students did not, the master students, at least the quants, I guess you'd call them, did not want to see that time wasted in class. They just could not gather that communication, which they were, funny dummies before their time. Maybe that'll change, but that's how we've been moving into, is really catering to the master students who understand it, not trying to fight a new battle, which again I think will change over time, because boy, the undergraduates were very receptive to it. So I don't know. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to give another example to even moving away to other forms of media, moving away from maybe even film media per se. So I teach another course on policy and difference in post-modernity, which is, in essence, a critical policy studies kind of course. And as a way to get access to various kinds of text, to really critically engage, I'll point to stuff going on popular culture or current events. So it might be an article that might be posted online, like National Geographic or something, or it might be a piece of film media. And I tell the students, focus on this, take a look at this, but focus more on the comments, people's comments and responses to it. Because in fact, that's where you see the really rich and interesting information, how people ideologically are making sense of the world and what's going on around them, and let alone even policy in particular. And so as policy students, as students going on to be policy professionals, it's important to have a really good understanding of who your constituents are and how they're making sense of these very topics that you're talking about. Okay, I can go.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
We just haven't talked much about extending the classroom in ways that get the students to connect with each other using technology. I've had sort of mixed experiences. Sometimes that works really well, and sometimes it doesn't. It seems to me that the classes that really gel well together and that develop this sense of identity and sharing and bringing lots more of them have this life outside of the classroom, which can be facilitated with technology.
What have you tried to do that you think has been effective?
Well, sometimes, I will have them react to a reading in advance of the class, so they post. So I've had some classes where they have to have blogs, and then you have to read either everybody's blog posting. Make various rules, structure it so that you have to read everybody's blog posting on a given day, and you have to comment 3 times in addition to your own, and then sometimes, I have to make police the rules early, but then if it takes off, I don't have to, and people are commenting all over the place, and I come into the classroom then already with a really rich conversation ongoing that we can, go with from there. But it feels a little bit like magic, like when it works, and I don't exactly know why it works sometimes, and I don't know if other people have techniques for doing that.
So I've done this a lot. I like it because it helps me identify what they're understanding and what they're not understanding. And so it requires that 2 hours before class, I go in and often change my lecture, depending on the mistakes in logic that I'm seeing, and if it's a more technical thing. But I think, we have a technology enhanced learning coordinator colleague, and she's helped me to realize that the key to making that work is to really make it be meaningful for students. Be clear about your parameters, and be clear about the assessment that you're doing. And that often, I just have had a class now where it just didn't work. I'm like, what happened? And she goes, oh, but you didn't say it has to be 500 words. And so students wrote 4 pages, and then it just killed itself. It didn't facilitate the dialogue because they were posturing. So it's been really, again, your purpose and the parameters. Do they align with your purpose?
And then I think telling the students that up front, right, from the beginning of class, that these videos or whatever we see in class, or these MP3s or guest speaker, we Skype in, these are in addition to all of this research evidence we're reading. And I think framing it in that way changes their expectations, at least what I've seen.
I think so too. I think just being very intentional and transparent about your intentionality with the material. I use the chat room function in our course management system, and so usually what I'll do is I'll say to students early on in the class, look, I am going to just, in a continual stream, as I see material out there in the world, in the newspapers and other forms of media that illustrate what we're talking about, I'm going to throw it up there. I encourage you to comment on that, and I encourage you to do the same and throw things up. And it's, sometimes I get students who are just constantly scanning and really in there and doing a lot of commentary. It's not something I assess, and I tell them up front, this isn't for assessment purposes, it's to enrich your experience. And then the thing that I find that matters to some extent the most is that I make sure that I jump back in there with a comment or two, because I found they want to see me in that discussion too. Otherwise, they think I've just given them busy work potentially, or and it can really also help to kind of make the direction flow in a way I may want it to flow a little bit more too, or pose a responsive question. But that has just been a little bit. I've done it in a way without some of the parameters you're describing, and those are intriguing to me to say, you must do sort of a certain amount so that you make sure you get people who might not otherwise jump in to jump in. But that has,
Is there a best practices site for something like that? Because I was just thinking of the word limits. I use this, but I never had a word limit. I never thought about it until you just said it. It would be interesting to have kind of a best practices for some of these techniques.
Well, here's an idea: is I have 5 new ideas for blog posts for a Huber project from this conversation. So we'll share some of the things what our technology enhanced learning coordinator shared with Jodi, and then
I want you to do something about this way of using the text.
Oh, yeah.
So really, our intention with this is for it to be a place where if you see something, throw it up. If you see some new research, put it up here. You have a question. If you use one of these materials, there's a comment box to say, I paired this with this 4 or 5 readings, and this is what happened, and I facilitated it this way. For each material that's up there, there's a usage note that the author writes about how they would suggest that you use it. There's also possibility to have supplemental material you can download, like a couple of peer-reviewed articles. So it's just an invitation to you. That's what we would like this to be. And if you're in public affairs and you want to be engaged in technology-enhanced learning, come join us.
Let me say what I think just sounds great about this is that for years before all this explosion of the technology, I just remember early on in my teaching career, the Kennedy case, and you couldn't get them, and then they would disappoint. It's like having a bad boyfriend. That's how it was. You promise so much and deliver so little. And so I was just being seriously, this is really high maintenance. And then they would be so out of date, and you're like, this is a great case, but the students think it's ancient, and I have no way of really getting research to bring it up to date. And what's so great about this is it's so nimble, because you can go back and find more materials to bring in. So you can do updates and say, okay, this is where we stopped this, and then the next year go back in and get the news article or the video clip that That's what happens after the court challenge. And so I just commend you for doing this. I think this is what we all need.
Well, to be explicit on two matters. One, Kennedy School has started to do this a little bit, but it costs $90 per case per student because their business model is based on their business school. Second of all, we've tried to build this in a way so that the costs for content creation are very low. And so it really, and a lot of the tools and things we have are open source. And so it really is trying to be, none of us have enough money, but together we can probably create enough content. And in doing it that way, we do have this issue that Sam raised about a different topic, but around quality control. And so right now, particularly because young scholars have said, this is amazing, and I can't build any content until I get tenure. We're piloting now the start of a double-blind peer review process. Obviously, this isn't a scholarly research article, but with that level of, and a contributor can say, I want to do that, or I don't want to do that, and there'll be a badge distinguishing which ones have gone through that to just create more incentive, because so much of the innovation and content creation is with our young scholars, and we don't want there to be a barrier